So welcome everybody. Can you see my t-shirt? That's the most important thing. We have another Make Menopause Matter conversation today. I am honestly delighted and thrilled. I don't think my smile could get any bigger to welcome my wonderful guest, Kate Muir, the award-winning producer of the documentary that everyone was talking about. It even gets a mention in the British Menopause Society Journal about the capacity for celebrities and documentaries to influence how we treat people. So Kate, it's just a delight to have you here, and we're going to have a conversation about menopause, but I'm just going to give you a bit of an intro, which is that you're an award-winning producer of the Channel 4 documentary Sex, Myths and Menopause with the wonderful Davina McCall. Hot off the press, you were filming yesterday for the second documentary that's coming out in May this year, which is brilliant. You were previously chief critic for the Times, which I didn't know that about you. Chief film critic, but you've worked as a correspondent for the Times in New York, Washington, Paris. And what's most wonderful, and I'm so excited, although we're not going to be talking about it, you have a new book out, which is coming out literally next week. So people, get on Amazon, get on your bookstore, whoever's your book provider, and start looking for your new book, which is titled
Everything You Need to Know About the Menopause, But We're Too Afraid to Ask. A short title, but it does what it says on the tin. Yeah,
it absolutely does. And I've taken a look at the summary.
I've got the copy here.
Oh, brilliant! Show us it. Show us it. Look, brilliant there. And you know, you can pre-order that. So honestly, I'm a big fan of books around the menopause, and I think this is the one that's really going to help us ladies, and it's going to help us the guys as well, to understand supportive partners, businesses, what's really going on. So let's start with menopause. We know that menopause is a biological, it's a psychological, it's a social condition. Why are you getting so involved in this, Kate? Why, what's your motivation?
Well, my motivation came from myself, but it's become a massive, wide movement that I've got involved in. So I feel like there's a real army out there of women tackling the menopause and tackling ignorance around the menopause. And certainly when I started out, I had no idea about perimenopause in particular. I know you're quite keen on perimenopause, Samantha. And I've always thought of perimenopause as menopause's dastardly little sister. In fact, I didn't really know it existed. And then I started to go, I think, quite bonkers, really. And certainly my temper went, and I think we could have a really great conversation about menopausal rage at some point. But I really began to change, and I didn't know about the mental effects of losing my hormones. No one told me, no doctor explained to me. And the key physical symptom for me was, in my late 40s, incredible anxiety, waking up at 4 a.m, panicking about work and everything. And I was perfectly capable of doing my job as the film critic at the Times, and had been previously. So what was I panicking about? I couldn't work it out. There was this kind of bolt, sit up in bed panic, the occasional sweat, and then incredible heart palpitations. And I'd wake up thinking, oh my God, I'm having a heart attack. And I went to my doctor, I said, I keep getting these heart palpitations. They wake me up in the middle of the night. And she said, oh, we'll take you off for an ECG. And they tested my heart, and they did everything, spent lots of money on the NHS. And then they came back and said, we think you're drinking too much coffee. And I said, well, I've always drunk 2 cups of coffee a day. What do you think? And anyway, they sent me away. And I was like, well, what is wrong with me? And it was only much, much later on, a year and a half later, when I was researching my book, that I discovered 11% of women of menopausal age get heart palpitations, which are to do with estrogen crashing. And I thought, the fact the doctor didn't know that when it's affecting 10 or 11% of the population is astonishing. And then also, one of the most important things for me, and again, it's in the mind. I mean, I had hot flushes. I thought I'll live through that. But at one point, I was about 51, 52, menopause coming crashing down upon me. I was writing a shopping list, and I thought, oh, I must shave my legs. And I wrote down the word shaver, because I couldn't remember the word razor. And that was a key moment for me, because I'm remembering all these films as a film critic. I never made any mistakes with that, but I couldn't remember an ordinary daily noun. And I thought, something is awfully wrong with my brain. I have dementia. And my mum died of Alzheimer's in 2015 after a long struggle. And I thought, oh my God, I am my mum, I'm losing my nouns, you know? Because instead of saying kind of wall, she would say fence made of stone. She'd look for other words to make her noun. And I was looking for other words for ordinary nouns. Total panic, hair falling out, just thought the end of the world is coming. So I started asking my friends and they said, oh, actually, we're secretly on HRT, but we don't talk about it. And they were going to a private clinic because I hadn't got any help from my doctor with the heart palpitations, etc. Been there twice, nothing had happened. Went and got the private HRT, which I sort of regret, but it was very useful at the time. And 4 days later, I was no hot flushes, felt fantastic, memory came back, no creaky joints when I was running. I mean, literally within a week, I'd gone from, you know, feeling like an old lady mad to just being my normal late 40 something kind of self again. So that was an astonishing transition. And I had all sorts of trouble with my HRT. And I ended up going to Louise Newson after I got incredible bleeding on this private stuff, which was not properly licensed, I don't think. And while Louise Newson, who is, you know, my hero and helped look through my book and make sure it was all correct and things like that. But while she was talking to me, she sorted out my symptoms in about 5 minutes. And then I'm in there like a journalist. And I'm going, so what's going on here? Why don't I know about any of these things? Why do no women know about any of these things? Why don't we talk about them? And she said, I've got a story to tell you. And this is the story that actually changed my life and made the reason why I'm here. And it's in my book as well, which is about a woman who's agreed for her story to be told, but I've changed her name in the book. It's anonymous because it is really quite upsetting. She's the nursery teacher up in Yorkshire. And in perimenopause, which she didn't really know what was going on, she started getting incredible depression and lots of UTIs and dry vagina and that awful kind of stuff going on down there. She didn't know why it was all happening, endlessly on antibiotics. But there's grinding depression, and she went in and got antidepressants, and then another set of antidepressants, and then another set. None of them worked. And after a year, she was diagnosed with drug-resistant depression. And she was given 12 sessions of electroconvulsive therapy. So it was shot across her head and in a mental hospital as an outpatient and sent back home each time. And basically it turned her sort of catatonic, and she sat in front of the television for this took about 7 years. And she felt really, really sort of close to suicide at one point. And at that point started researching what was going on, suddenly got really desperate. She said, I can't deal with this. And she researched it and realized about hormone related depression. Anyway, even more complicated story. She couldn't leave her home because she was agoraphobic, depressed. So she they mortgaged their house and they got an RV vehicle, a caravan, a motorized caravan. They took it to Louise Newson's surgery, parked outside, and she was able to go from the caravan into the surgery without being terrified. She went in, she got HRT. 7 days later, she came home and she walked her dog outside around the block for the first time in 7 years, okay? So this was a woman who had been completely diagnosed with terrible depression, and all she needed was to get her hormones back. And if doctors had been educated, they'd have put together those perimenopausal symptoms of, UTIs, dry vagina, depression that hadn't been there before. The picture was there, and probably people would diagnose it now, but at that point they did not. And I thought, I can't let that happen to any other woman ever again. I have to tell that story to as many people as I can. And then I got obsessed.
Well, that's brilliant that you did. I mean, I found that really emotional. Actually, I found that really emotional hearing you say that, because I think we just spoke briefly before we recorded this that as a potted summary, and it really doesn't do it justice, just how traumatic and mentally upsetting it was, and still is, by the way, because my GP practice still doesn't have anyone who gives a Scooby-Doo about menopause. I live in Devon. There isn't a single menopause clinic in Devon or Cornwall. It is disgusting. Yeah. It's outrageous. Louise Newson's actually my doctor, so I travel the 350 round trip to see her. But out of desperation, I said to you that I was at the doctor's surgery every month on antibiotics. I was in a consultation for the 15th time with a locum, and I saw his screen, and on the top of my notes it said worried well. And I was told by the most senior female partner in that practice that I probably needed a little holiday. Great. And in the end, she said, I don't think there's anything more we can do for you. And that was when I was 38.
That was UTIs that kept coming and coming.
I had cystitis. I also had, as I didn't know then, and this is why I'm so passionate about perimenopause, histamine intolerance was starting to develop. So that goes very much, that's like the evil twin of estrogen. You know, a lot of the symptoms like palpitations can also be histamine intolerance. I was getting palpitations, so I became an expert on my own dire situation, to the point out of desperation. Do you know, I went to the sexual health clinic to get my hormone levels tested, and it was one of the most degrading episodes in my life. I was sat in the sexual health clinic, people judgmentally, you know, looking at you walking in through the doors, but it was the only way that I realized I could get my FSH levels tested, because I cottoned on to, do you know what, if I go to a fertility clinic, they're going to at least tell me what my FSH. Now, I've got the wherewithal because I've got a pharmaceutical background. I actually used to sell HRT, a nasal HRT, right at the time that the Women's Health study came out. And it was awful because that was a revolutionary nasal introduction to taking HRT. What could be simpler than spraying something up your nose? And so I clocked that, and then I was having more urinary tract infections, yeast infections. I presented in hospital on New Year's Day with yeast overload because I became estrogen dominant. I just didn't have enough progesterone. So I'm passionate about the perimenopause because that's when our progesterone goes wobbly. We do hear a lot about the estrogen, but I think we need to sensitize people to that three-legged stool that I heard Molly Ball talk about, Dr. Molly Ball, which is, you know, you don't have just one stool, which is estrogen, it's progesterone and testosterone. So we need to look at all three, that triumvirate.
Yeah.
And the only way I got treated was hearing Louise Newson on Women's Hour. My lovely husband said to me, as a lady, Radio 4, he said, I think we should listen to it, which was lovely.
Oh, what a sweetie.
Yeah. And my husband has lived through it, and I feel passionately for partners. It's awful. What the hell do they do? You know, your loved one is falling apart. The wheels are falling off your relationship. There often is no any more intimacy anymore, and all you have is an angry person who's like a volatile firework. So I totally agree with you. And so on the same page, it's about we must do more. And isn't it gorgeous, the amount of awareness and the amount of people who are fired up about this subject. So in terms of your book, there are a number of people who've put books out. What do you think makes your book different in this landscape that's going to appeal to women who, quite frankly, don't have the wherewithal to concentrate? What is it they can gauge from your book that's going to help them?
I basically provide every solution there is to the menopause disaster zone. And I also, one of the key things for me was basically when we shut down into lockdown, I decided to really write this book, and I interviewed every scientist around the world. So I've interviewed the International Menopause Society in Australia, all these guys in Yale, all these women in, California, everyone in Britain, the head of so I went to all these different silos of people who don't talk to one another normally in menopause and endocrinology and hormonal world. And I've joined the dots. And in a sense, this is partly because Louise Newson has actually taught me a lot of science and is always sending me a bloody science paper at midnight that's just come out in, the North American Menopause Society Journal. But what I did was, because I'm not a scientist and a doctor, I translated it into the human world and into things like, this is what testosterone will do for my brain tomorrow in a meeting. When I walk in, I will feel powerful and not invisible because I'm using testosterone, and it also helps with my libido. Terrific, but things like that. And also, one of the most important things for every chapter, I wanted to tell women's stories, like the story I told about the nursery teacher in Yorkshire. And every time we tell one of those stories, then someone comes back and says, that's not my story. This is my story. And then they tell their story. And then at a certain point, one of those stories is your survival guide. And I think there will be one story for everyone in my book, I hope, that will be one woman's survival guide. And obviously you can just go to the chapter that says vagina and sex. that's the bit I need to know. Alzheimer's, how does estrogen affect Alzheimer's? That's my story that I'm most interested in, because of my mum dying of Alzheimer's. And I've realized how much estrogen protects the brain. And I've got the scientific papers in there about how much estrogen and testosterone protect the brain. And I think for, there's 1 in 5 women get Alzheimer's in this country. It's the thing that kills women most. It's a really important thing to know about, how to look after your brain, what to eat, and take exercise and get estrogen if you can. And, the fact that the NHS has not got that as a lead thing they're saying to people, we can save women from osteoporosis. We can save them, most of them, from Alzheimer's. We can save them from having heart attacks. We can save them from having stiff joints and being miserable. And we can save them from having mental breakdowns. And we can make this huge difference to women's health in a massive way. And policy needs to change tomorrow. It could change tomorrow. You could put out a note to doctors that says, here are the symptoms. Give this list of 20 symptoms, or 50 symptoms if you happen to women when they come in their 40s and 50s, and particularly perimenopausal women who don't know what's happening to them, have no idea, and let them tell you what they're feeling looking at this list, and then maybe join the menopause dots yourself. And I think that's what's not happening. And it has to come from women up, because it's not come from the medical establishment down.
And that's the thing that makes me so grumpy, having worked in the pharmaceutical industry and engaged with national health professionals. It's just inconceivable. Louise Newson was on This Morning yesterday, wasn't she? And said that actually, if this was a man's domain, a male domain, a man's issue, we wouldn't be talking about this. This would have been sorted. And for me, the joining the dots bit is the most important, because I remember being at my dentist going, is it normal for my gums to be burning and this to have this really awful taste? And he was going, I've got no idea what you're talking about. It's all of those things. And I think, we know that there's a strategy, that there was a communication that went out, wasn't there, from the Department of Health asking for people's experiences. I think they've had a bit of a wake-up call with that one. Yeah. That most women feel sidelined, we feel marginalised. I certainly, that is definitely my experience, and I'm someone who has a reasonable scientific background. So let alone also that whole cohort of women that came off HRT due to the Women's Health Study, again, my mother-in-law is struggling terribly with like fibromyalgia type symptoms. And I remember Louise Newson saying that actually we should be reviewing everyone in a care home. UTIs are the single biggest reason why people are admitted to hospital. Women are admitted.
Yeah.
How could we positively impact that? But coming back to those women that are, fortunately, I came out of mainstream employment, because honestly, I think if I'd have been how I was in mainstream employment, one of two things would have happened. I would have been sidelined in my career, or I would have been managed out, because the symptoms were so unbearable. And I'm doing some research for a book that I'm part of, and we're looking at mental health and menopause in the workplace. And do you know, on average in a career, a woman will have 32 weeks of absence due to long-term sickness issues, and menopause is the number one reason. 32 weeks in a career, and so how do we, it's so wonderful what your book is going to do. It's going to help people like me, career women, aspirational women. It's going to help us help ourselves. It's going to help us feel more empowered to have those conversations with our medical professionals. What do you see going forward? What do you hope for women in terms of being in the workplace? Because that's another whole caveat in itself. Sorry, I was just going to say that in terms of in the workplace, how do we go from being a tick box exercise? I do a lot of stuff for mental health. Being really frank with you, most organisations see that as a tick box exercise to get past, health and safety. Yeah, I have had companies already say to me, "What's the cheapest way that we can get menopause in?" The cheapest way. Jokingly. So what do you see in terms of your book and how it's going to change the landscape of how we approach menopause in the workplace?
Yeah, well, I don't think it's just my book. I think it's the movement, but I do have a chapter on menopause at work in the book. I think the whole business of big companies having a menopause policy and a menopause champion, and everybody saying we should make a little adjustment and give people a little fan in their office and a little bit of time off. I mean, for me, that's great in perimenopause when people aren't sure quite what's going on. But in menopause, people need medical advice, absolutely superb, accurate, evidence-based medical advice. And you do not want to have a hot flush at work, because it genuinely does affect your brain and your memory. And you do not want to have brain fog and sleepless at work, particularly if you're doing an important job that, say, like a nurse, involves prescribing or something. You do not want to forget things. And the idea that we now know, and it may not be the most delightfully feminist thing, but we know that our brains change during perimenopause and menopause. And yes, they reboot afterwards, but we do have, many of us, like me, have this difficult period that you're going to solve one way or the other. And we really, really need the medical information out to women, because why do you need to suffer? I mean, the minute I got HRT, I was fine. I was writing a book, I was making a documentary. I just got on with stuff. And we just want to get on with stuff and look after our families and, have fun. And literally the workplace is absolutely key to this. And it is key that women are informed how safe HRT is. And that the previous studies, and I've been through them all, I have a whole chapter on this. If you want to read it, you can skip over, but the previous studies show that they're all on an older form of HRT, which is, and you will know this having dealt with HRT in the past, the old oral pill contained progestins, INS at the end, right? The new stuff is progesterone, which is an identical copy of what's in your body identical HRT and body identical estrogen. And if you get the body identical stuff, your cancer rate over 5 years risk of breast cancer is 0. They've done a few studies in France. There are 3 studies in France on this, and one of the studies shows a tiny increase in breast cancer over 10 years for these women. The other 2 studies show a decrease in breast cancer. But if you look at the studies all together and look at the 5 years, that's exactly when estrogen would make your tumor that was there grow, there's nothing at all. And so there we are, sitting with science from France that's telling us, this stuff is so much safer than the old stuff. And because it's body identical, it works better in our bodies, and it doesn't give us kind of funny depression and all sorts of things like that. Yeah. It is, what's the most natural thing to put into your body after your hormones leave? The same hormones. Don't think black cohosh and sage leaves are going to help you necessarily, because they're not part of your body. So the idea that you get back what you had when you were in your 40s in, roughly the same amount. And the other hormone, as you were saying about the 3-legged stool, is testosterone. And when I'm with a group of women, I often say, and you'll get this right, I'm sure, Amantha, but what's the biggest hormone that women make?
Testosterone. 3 times as much as this estrogen.
Testosterone. What does it say presently on the NHS website about testosterone? It's a male hormone. No, it's not, NHS. And I've checked it a million times, and I've talked to all the professors and the academics. The NHS website is wrong, and it's wrong about the effects of testosterone, and it doesn't include properly in HRT. You're only allowed to have testosterone if you go usually to a menopause clinic. It takes months and months, and as you know, there's not one near you, so you couldn't have any anyway. And there's nothing about the effect testosterone has on your brain, on your muscles, on your energy, on your lack of fatigue. And so many women are struggling multitasking in their early 50s, and they've got this incredible fatigue and this lack of energy. And testosterone after 3 months, certainly for me, made this huge difference in the amount of energy I had, and the energy, to drag a documentary out of lockdown and get it up there.
You don't just do that.
And the idea that this is not being considered, and we don't deserve our hormone back, but men do. and men deserve Viagra, but we have to crawl to a menopause clinic if we'd like our libidos looked after. And it might take us a year to get to that menopause clinic. But yeah, you can pop in and get Viagra over the counter tomorrow. So long as men are satisfied, we don't matter. And it's the greatest inequality, you know, and it's why marriages break up and relationships break up as well. You know, why is the divorce rate, does it peak at perimenopause? What could that be? It's like, it's absolutely no-brainer.
It's not difficult, is it?
Signs.
It's not. I mean, I used to promote products for blood pressure, and I used to promote products for diabetes when I worked in the pharmaceutical industry. It would be inconceivable to say to a diabetic, listen, have it for 5 years, see how you get on, and then try and manage it yourself. You know, if you had hypothyroidism, you know, these are hormone deficiencies. When you run out, you run out. You need to replace it. I mean, I can honestly see a time, because we live in a world where menopause and perimenopause is being treated. We know in Australia, in Western Australia, you can get androfen, testosterone from your doctor, no worries. We know in France they've had a much more liberal attitude to HRT for decades, actually. Not just, that's not new. You know, I worked for a French pharmaceutical company that developed one to spray up your nose. But that never got off the ground because of all the terrible misinformed data that came out. But I can see a time, honestly, where there will be some litigation. Actually, people will start to make claims. I haven't ruled it out myself, quite possibly, because the reality is, if the evidence is there and it's not being followed, there's a case to be answered. Why aren't you doing it? If that's just because there's a lack of provision in the NHS, the powers that be need to be doing something about it. But what I have noticed in my own research is the pensions part of the government have got on board with the menopause, because they've done their studies in the 50 plus. There's going to be a massive deficit if women like myself, like you, suddenly fall off the employment travelator and we're no longer contributing to the pot of pensions. Who's going to provide for us? I think they've started to wake up, not because they care about us, but because they care about the coffers in the pot.
I think the economic argument is massive, and it's as simple as this. You know, 1 in 2 women get osteoporosis. How much does it cost on the NHS to break your hip? £15,000 for the care and the aftercare.
Wow.
How much does it cost for a year's HRT of the good body identical kind? About £120. So it's a choice of spending £120 over about 10 years or whatever, or how long, or 15,000. And how much does it cost to, like, for my mum to be in a care home with dementia? £40,000 a year, or £120 for HRT. And you just think, if we gave this to The Economist to work through the figures, what would they come up? Maybe that's what I should do. Maybe that's what we're doing wrong.
Can you please put that? I mean, if it's not too late to put that in, could you please put that in?
Yeah, because, I mean, it's astonishing. And also, let's be frank, it's fantastic having your hormones back, you know, and it's fantastic, you know, and I feel, you know, I'm 57, but I never wake up in the morning feeling creaky. I don't get sore joints when I go running. You know, I've got lots of energy in all sorts of places, you know, and why did we want to live a miserable life? And when you're not living a miserable life and you meet someone, you say, well, you could do that. And then you think, and, you know, every week I meet someone, I say, you know, maybe you should just go see your GP, and they come back and go, oh, wow. And, you know, that is such a joy. Yeah, I think that's why we keep doing this. I mean, we're so sick of the word menopause, but every week I meet someone, and, you know, they change their life, and then their partner's life change, and then they tell someone else. And we are this network, this army of people, and we're putting out good news, you know? Yeah. I mean, Diane Danzebrink and her Make Menopause Matter campaign, Carolyn Harris in Parliament, all the people who've written menopause books, you know, we are this fantastic army of women, and we, you know, there's no dispute about the information. We know what we're doing. We know what we want. And government just needs to pay attention to us, you know.
And you're absolutely right. And I think even things like already, you know, it's great, you know, maybe we'll get our prescriptions free, but let's get the clarity. What about people like myself? I have 5 different products from HRT. You know, I've got pessaries, I've got 2 different doses of Sandrina gel, I've got a progesterone pessary, I've got, you know, a vaginal sort of thing going on. You know, the reality is I want to know, are you going to pay for all of it for me? You know, or is it just one prescription free for a year? So I think we need action. I'm a go-getter. That won't surprise anyone watching this, but you know, the reality is I get bored quite quickly of the conversation of we could do this, we should do this. It's like, well, come on, with all the evidence is there. I'm currently working with a group called Menopause X, which are getting the data. You know, I'm so excited to be part of that group because you know why? Once we've got the numbers, it's irrefutable. You know, then the economists will definitely have to pay attention. But all this noise is fabulous. But I've got a couple of other questions I wanted to ask you. So yeah, can we come back to the menopause champion thing? I'm not a fan. I'm a mental health first aider. I really have looked at lots of forums and people saying, number one, I wouldn't go to anybody to talk about my menopause. And just because there's a menopause champion in the building, it's way too personal. It's way too loaded with, okay, how am I going to be judged now? I think businesses need to provide a confidential, an impartial service where women can go and have conversations. Now, I've tested this out myself. I've been coaching women on my Instagram feed at MenoCoach, my MenoCoach, for free. And I've been doing exactly what you just described there. I've been saying to women, here's the information, take this to your GP. Here's the document on the NICE guidance website. This is what Louise Newson's saying through the Balance app. Take that with you. I've had women say, I haven't slept for 2 years, not a complete night's sleep. Yeah. And it's been it's life affirming and changing. But these women talk so openly because they know there's no comeback. I'm not in charge of their next career step. I'm not going to be tittle tattling over the coffee bar with, oh, you know, you've heard about Sylvia, nightmare. She's going through a menopause, marriage is falling apart. Because that's what happens currently, Kate, in mental health. Mental health has become a tick list. So what do you think about women's health? You know, we have honed in on menopause, and I'm very mindful not to exclude those women who've experienced primary ovary insufficiency. So that's a menopause before their 40s. You know, that can happen as young as 13 or 14. And I'm also mindful not to discount those women who are experiencing fertility issues or premenstrual dysphoric disorder. So do you think menopause is the starting point for actually making women's health better in its entirety? I mean, what would be a better alternative to a menopause champion? Do you have any ideas?
I don't, but I think the conversations, you know, in workplaces about all those subjects need to take place, and men need to be in the conversations too. And I don't think you necessarily need a champion, but I think, I mean, a lot of the rather good organizations like Talking Menopause, I went on one of their ones with a defense contractor, which was a very male establishment, and watched all the comments coming in beforehand from men about what they thought menopause was and things like that. The embarrassment, the people's fear to put stuff in the room, and then the fear sort of dissipating as various people got up and quite bravely discussed it. But to have a group of men and women together, a workplace, and bring in one medical expert and menopause expert who can say, these are the options, this is what happens to your brain in perimenopause, this is what we might see, you know. I think to make that culture available and that knowledge available and not have it in a website, nobody looks at any of these things in a website. You have to have a live performance, preferably not on Zoom with people with it half switched off, but actually, you know, you have to have an evening. There's a wonderful thing with West Midlands Police, and they had a comedian come in and do a kind of menopause teaching session at the same time in the evening with the police women and their partners, male or female, and their friends, and they had a whole room of people laughing together in the evening when menopause, probably had a drink, and then go back, and then it's so normalized, and you know, some of it is funny. That's the other thing. You know, all right, hot flushes, people make these terrible jokes, but there are these great people talking about menopause. And I went in December to see Bridget Christie, who is a great comedian.
Oh, right.
And she did a whole hour on menopause at the Leicester Square Theatre. She did menopause stand-up. and it was great. You know, it was really hilarious.
And isn't it
Lots of
funny?
anger.
Because we let our guard down. Menopause is funny. I have some of the funniest conversations with women. You know, I've seen something online. It's a cushion that's in the shape of a vagina. I'm so tempted to get one, because I think what an icebreaker. It looks like a massive pair of lips, which, you know, anatomically is not dissimilar to what it looks like down there. But I think you're absolutely right. I think if we can normalize, doesn't go far enough. I think if we can humorize part of it, if we can make it softer, if we can make it more accessible to people, I think that's such a good thing. I love that idea of a comedian. So from your point of view, what do you hope for in the next 5 years? You know, so you're doing this amazing documentary. I can't wait to see it. In that's coming out in May. What can we look forward to in that documentary? Because the part one, like I say, I mean, it just has captured the hearts and minds of people, and all types of people have watched it, taken something from it.
Yeah.
What will part two do?
Well, some of it is secret,
okay,
because we're testing some things. But no, a lot of it will be about menopause at work and the menopause brain drain. Those women in their late 40s and 50s just disappearing, about 10%, just disappearing from the workforce, the part-timers, the people who go on to do other jobs that aren't as powerful as the jobs they were in, the crash in the careers. So it's about that. And also the women who get kind of disappeared and, you know, sign an NDA and get shoved off and you never hear anything about them again. So we will be tackling that. And one of the most important things we want to explain to women, and I'm hugely keen on this, is we've got two brilliant scientists coming in from New York to explain what happens to your brain in menopause. And I think that will be a revelation to every woman and every man. And it will be scary, but it will also show you how your brain can reboot. And just as it reboots in pregnancy, it also might reboot at the other side of menopause. And protecting your brain is the most important thing we're going to learn, I think, from this story. And I think women have to embrace the science. I mean, when you know, I've had 3 kids. When I had those kids, I read, you know, one of those manuals, a fat manual, and, you know, from cover to cover. And if I hadn't, there were various things that happened with my kids and injuries they got and, you know, being sick or whatever. And I thought, I know, I'll go to the manual. It tells me what to do. And I remember what to do. And so I was well up on how to be a mum.
Yes.
I was never well up on how to be a menopausal woman. And I think we really, really need, we need our manuals and we need our stories. And we need our community. I think we really need, and one of the things I'm hoping with my book, I've written a guide with the publisher for book groups, which I hope will take place in pubs.
Yes.
So women can all read the book and pass it around and then go, well, that's not what happened to my vagina. And this is what I did. And this is what happened to me at work. And and then the philosophy of it as well, you know, why have we been treated like this? Yeah. Why is menopause about crones and witches? Why won't women themselves, you know, Botoxing themselves madly, admit to being 50 and powerful and strong and wrinkly? And, you know, why can't we be honest, and why can't we embrace this? And why can't we see menopause as a portal that you go through to the other side? And then this is the second half of your life. And what are you going to do with it? You know, there's a quote from a poet called Mary Oliver, and it goes, tell me, what is it that you are going to do with your wild and precious life? Oh, and I think if you've got your wild and precious life coming up for the next 50 years, then you want to do something fantastic with it. And I think menopause is a real wake-up call and a real door to walk through for all of us, was for me. And I think
absolutely, and I'm with you. And I said to you yesterday, someone asked me what my motivation was for doing this, because I do all of my work without question free, and I will see and speak to any woman because I see it as a sisterhood. But my motivation, and the heart of my motivation, comes around my daughter. You know, she's just going through puberty or coming out the other side of puberty. That's the first big door we walk through as women, and yet we're conditioned. It's all about contraception. It's all about controlling your hormones, stopping your hormones. Oh, the first conversation you have after having a baby is to go and check everything's all right. And actually, would you like to start contraception again? You know, I want her to be able to walk through another door knowing what she's going into, being aware that in your 20s, 30s, your hormones could change. If you want to have a family, it's maybe important to get that checked out, knowing what the dots are so that when you do need to join them, it's very easy to do. And so I agree with you. Everything that you've said, I think all it does is it makes the spotlight even brighter. And it allows us to walk into that light. I mean, I set up my business in 2010, right at the height of my perimenopause. I was at my most anxious, my most fearful, my most resentful, my most hormonal. And I want women, I want us sooner rather than later to change this narrative that actually, no, you're getting your hormones. So now let's talk about the excitement of what this means for you.
Yeah.
You know, come on, sister, what's the next thing that you're into? What are you doing? What's put that smile on your face? And a time to look forward to, because you know what, we work hard as mums, don't we? Work hard as women, and we raise a family, the worst paid job in the world. So why shouldn't we have this golden time where anything's possible? So I agree with you. So if you had one thing that you would want to put in a time capsule.
Oh God.
I don't know. I didn't even know I was going to ask that question. That's a menopause brain for you, isn't it?
I've got a really good, I think I've got a good answer to that. Hold on.
There you go.
This is a tube of androgen testosterone. And at this moment in, 2022, when women first started taking testosterone, the world changed when they got their hormone back after 50.
Oh,
maybe that's what I put in a time capsule.
I love that.
It emphasizes it's the whole conversation. It's all about men, but yet, guess what? It's our hormone too. And the medical system, this whole world for the last centuries and centuries has been all about men, and we need to understand ourselves. And I think that is almost a key symbol.
Maybe that could make the last cut before of the programme, Kate. Maybe a time capsule, because that's the thing about time capsules. It tells us about our history, doesn't it? It tells us what we were going through, what we were doing. And I think you're right. I think on a spiritual level, testosterone has had, it's been against us all our lives, and yet, like we've said, it's our most dominant hormone. So move over, guys. Not your hormone, it's our hormone.
Yeah, we're reclaiming it.
We're reclaiming. Oh my goodness, I can't think of a better place to conclude our discussion than you need quite a big time capsule, because it's a fair old tube, isn't it? Not room for much. What I hope for the future is that actually the 50s, your 40s, 50s are a time of aspiration. We look forward to, we don't dread. We're not thinking about, is my vagina dry or not? I can't remember my name or the last part of that sentence, but it's just a time of aspiration and hope and joy. So Kate Muir, thank you so much. But before we finish, how can people connect with you? They're going to all rush out and pre-order or order your book. I definitely have. So how can people be in touch with you to know more about what it is you do and what's coming up?
Well, simply my Twitter and Instagram are Menoscandal, 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 because that's what it's about. So that's where to get hold of me, and I can answer messages on those. So yeah.
Lovely. Well, Kate, I very much hope I get another chance to interview you after the excitement of the second documentary. But from me to you, thank you so much on behalf of all women, and not just the perimenopausal or menopausal women or postmenopausal women, but thank you on behalf of all women, because actually it takes a brave and special person to go, okay, I'm using my story as a force for good. So for all those women out there that are brave enough to do that, keep the faith, keep the hope, be kind wherever you can be. And so thank you so much for all that you're doing.
And thank you for what you're doing too.
Oh, thank you.